Would you dare to explore an abandoned castle, where even the ghosts don't want to stay? They say the walls still whisper the secrets of those who never left, doors that slam shut on their own, shadows lurking in the darkness, and a silence that hides something, eerie or someone. Press play, if you dare, but be careful, some visitors have never been the same. Watch now and discover the dark mysteries of this cursed castle, the castle of drowned whispers. The night dragged on thick over the forest around Vellir Castle, suffocating any trace of moonlight. The trees around, twisted by time, seemed to bend to whisper forbidden secrets to each other, while the night breeze carried a scent of dampness and something else, something rotten, forgotten in the depths of time. Vellir stood atop a cliff that plunged directly into a bottomless black lake. During the day, the water reflected the cloudy sky like a broken mirror, but at night its surface became a portal to the unknown. The residents of the nearest village refused to pronounce the castle's name, for they said that even speaking of it was enough to attract the wrath of those who died there. It was said that Lord Edric Vellir, the castle's last ruler, was a cruel and ruthless man. He did not trust common dungeons for his enemies. He condemned them to a far worse fate. In an underground chamber beneath the castle, there was a drainage system connected to the lake. When the gates were sealed, water would slowly begin to seep in, turning the cell into a deadly trap. The condemned would spend hours, sometimes days, watching the water level rise with no way to escape, until finally they were swallowed by the frigid darkness. But what no one knew was that some of them never truly died. Years after the mysterious fall of Edric Vellir and the abandonment of the castle, rumors began to surface. Farmers who passed near the lake at dawn swore they saw pale hands emerging from the water before sinking again. Sometimes, at midnight, indistinct sounds echoed from the ruins, distorted voices, as if someone was trying to speak underwater. This is what attracted a group of paranormal explorers. Elena, an experienced investigator, led the team. With her were Julian, a staunch skeptic, Marco, the audio and video technician, and Daniel, a historian obsessed with urban legends. The plan was simple: spend the night in the castle, record any activity, and leave at dawn. As they passed through the corroded gates, the silence became oppressive. The air carried a scent of wet stone and ancient rust. Each step made the floor creak, as if the boards could give way at any moment. The group set up their equipment in the Great Hall, where dust danced in the dim light of their lanterns. While exploring the narrow corridors, Daniel found inscriptions carved into the walls. They were names, hundreds of names. "My God, these are Edric's victims," he murmured, running his fingers over the rough letters. Julian laughed. "Or someone with too much free time and a sharp knife." But then came the first sound, a rhythmic dripping, as if something was dripping from an invisible ceiling. But the floor was dry, and the sound was coming from within the walls. The group followed the corridor to a double iron door. They pushed with effort and revealed a spiral staircase descending into the subterranean depths. The darkness below seemed alive, pulsating. The stench of decay grew stronger. Marco adjusted the night vision camera, and the screen became grainy with interference. But for a second, a figure appeared on the footage, a translucent silhouette standing at the foot of the stairs. "This was a mistake," Elena said, but no one wanted to back down now. Step by step, they descended until they reached the drowning chamber. The floor was black stone, cracked by time. In the center of the room was an iron grate, rusted, with ancient chains. The drainage system appeared inactive, but moisture dripped from the walls. Daniel approached the grate. He didn't notice when water began to seep through the cracks in the floor. Small puddles formed around his feet. "Do you hear that?" Marco asked, looking around. It was a low, distorted sound, words without a voice. The water around them shimmered, forming circles, as if something was moving within it. Suddenly, Daniel screamed and fell backward. Something was pulling him into the water. Elena grabbed his arm, but felt as if icy fingers were wrapped around her friend's ankle. She pulled with all her strength, and suddenly Daniel was released. He fell gasping to the floor, trembling with fear. His face was as pale as wax. I saw faces in the water," he stammered. "They're trapped here. They never left." It was then that the lights flickered and went out. The group stood in the dark for a few seconds. When Marco managed to turn the lantern back on, Julian was no longer there. "Julian! Julian!" Elena shouted. There was no answer, only the sound of water rising. The recordings never showed what happened next. The police found only Elena and Marco wandering disoriented through the forest the next morning. Daniel was found in a state of shock near the village. None of them could explain what had occurred inside the castle. Julian was never found. His name joined the others on the wall of the drowning chamber. Today, Veller Castle remains there, watching, waiting. And they say that if you go to the lake on a moonless night and look into the water, you will see pale faces reflected on its surface, faces with wide eyes, faces that are still drowning. The fortress of blood guardians, the Cormath forest, stretched like a dark ocean, dense and impenetrable. In its heart, hidden among ancient trees and perpetual mist, stood a fortress forgotten by time. Its sharp towers tore the cloudy sky, its black stone walls covered in moss and scars from battles that few remembered. But the true story of the Cormath fortress was not in the battles it fought, but in the horrors it concealed. They said that a secret order of knights resided there. They were not common warriors. They were the blood guardians, cursed knights who sold their souls in exchange for power. Centuries ago, when war devastated the neighboring lands, the guardians swore to protect the fortress at any cost. But the cost was too high. To ensure their immortality, they began to practice profane rituals, sacrificing anyone who dared to approach. Their bodies resisted time, but their souls became prisoners of the fortress. No one dared cross the forest after sunset. Sometimes a faint reddish light flickered in the windows of the towers, as if invisible candles burned inside the ruin. The elders recounted that those who got too close were marked by the guardians. The next morning their houses were found empty, the doors open as if they had never been inhabited. No body was ever found. It was this legend that attracted a group of urban explorers fascinated by the occult. Adam, an independent documentarian, had convinced his friends to film an expedition inside the fortress. With him were Vera, the skeptical researcher, Nolan, the sound technician, and Harper, a sensitive medium. Equipped with lanterns, cameras, and drones, they crossed the forest under the dense fog, following the coordinates of ancient maps. The first sight of the fortress was overwhelming. Even in ruins, its imposing presence made anyone feel insignificant. Adam recorded every detail, narrating as they advanced through the main entrance. A stone arch with worn carvings. Harper stopped before the symbols, her face paling. "This is not just a fortress," she murmured. "It's a tomb." No one wanted to listen. They proceeded through the main hall where faded tapestries still hung from the walls. The floor was covered with a thin layer of dust, interrupted only by strange marks, like footprints, but not human. Then a sound cut through the silence. A scraping of metal against stone, as if a blade was being drawn from a scabbard. "That came from upstairs," Nolan whispered. Adam pointed the camera at the staircase. On the screen, for a brief second, he captured something that made him swallow hard. A silhouette of ancient armor, immobile at the top of the stairs. He blinked. When he looked again, there was nothing, just darkness. They climbed cautiously. The air was heavy, and each step creaked under their feet. When they reached the upper corridor, they saw doors aligned on both sides, all ajar, as if waiting for visitors. Harper refused to enter any of them. Her body trembled. "They're here, watching us," she whispered. Vera rolled her eyes, but then something happened. One of the doors closed on its own. With a bang, Nolan screamed and fell backward. His camera, thrown to the floor, continued recording, and on it, everyone saw metallic feet gliding over the stone floor. The reflection of a silver helmet shining in the dim light. They were not alone. Terror gripped the group. They ran through the corridor, but the doors now slammed one after another, blocking their exits. The sound of the armor intensified. Something was moving in the darkness. Harper, paralyzed, turned slowly. Her eyes widened, and a suffocated scream escaped her throat. An imposing figure emerged from the shadows, a faceless knight, his armor stained with something dark and dry. He raised his sword, and red flames illuminated the corridors of the fortress. Then everything went dark. The next morning, only Adam's camera was found at the entrance to the forest. The video showed only empty ruins and the wind cutting through the walls. No sign of the group, no trace of footprints, no clue that anyone had even been there. They say that on moonless nights, if anyone looks at the fortress from the outside, they can see shadowy figures in armor standing on the battlements, waiting. Those who enter never leave. They just become part of the curse, guarding the fortress for all eternity. The Castle of the Caged Countess. Ravelin Castle stands like a stone skeleton on top of a hill forgotten by time. Its Gothic towers, covered in twisted ivy, are the last remnants of an era of terror and despair. The wind howls through its broken windows, and those who dare to approach swear they hear the sound of scratching coming from within the walls, as if something or someone is still trying to escape. The story of Countess Elisabetta Ravelin is one of the most macabre tales of the region. They say that in the 17th century she ruled with unparalleled cruelty. Her servants lived in terror, and peasants feared her wrath, for those who disobeyed her disappeared without a trace. Rumors said that she believed that youth and beauty could be preserved through the suffering of others. And so, on moonless nights, the screams coming from the castle echoed through the valley. But her tyranny came to an end. On a winter night, a rebellion took over the castle. Servants, peasants, and even nobles who feared her cruelty invaded the fortress, killing her guards and capturing the countess. However, instead of executing her, they decided to give her a worse punishment. They condemned her to the very prison she had created for her victims. In the heart of the castle, there was a secret chamber, without doors, without windows, only a small opening through which food and water passed. There they locked Elisabetta, sealing the entrance with stones and mortar. Her screams echoed for days, weeks, maybe months. Then silence took over the castle. And over time, the legend was born. The Caged Countess is still there. In the 20th century, a group of historians decided to investigate the ruins of the castle. Armed with lanterns and modern equipment, they entered the dusty corridors, recording every detail. The air was heavy, filled with the smell of rotting wood and dampness. Local legends said that no one should call out the Countess's name within the walls, but one of the researchers, a skeptic named Louis, scoffed at the story and said her name aloud. At that moment, the temperature dropped, the lights flickered, and then the sound began, a faint scratching coming from inside the walls. The explorers followed the sound, descending to the cellars of the castle. At the end of a narrow corridor, they found a wall different from the others, the stones darker and older. Marco, the group's archaeologist, touched the cold surface. "Here, this is where she was sealed," he murmured. Louis laughed, but his laughter died in his throat when the scratching sound became more intense. Something was inside the wall, something that was still moving. Suddenly, a crash echoed through the castle. One of the lanterns fell and darkness engulfed the group. In the darkness, a hoarse breath filled the air. "Help me!" The voice was weak but clear. Louis gasped. The sound came from inside the wall. Panic set in. Bodies collided in the dark, desperately seeking the exit. When they finally reached the outside, the night seemed colder, the wind sharper. But the horror did not end there. The next day, Marco disappeared. His friends searched for him in the village, in the forest, and in the castle, but there was no sign of him. Only a disturbing detail emerged. Near the wall where they heard the scratches, they found something new. His name, scratched into the stone, as if fingernails had carved it there. They say that since then each year a new name appears on that wall. and those whose name appears are never seen again. The Towers of the Soul Hunter. On top of the Grimswold Hills stood a castle unlike any other. Its twin towers pierced the sky like sharp spears, watching the land below with a dark presence. During the day, the wind whistled through its empty windows, and at night, something more sinister took over the place. It was a castle built to be a trap, a fortress where no one entered and left the same way. Its last resident was known as the Soul Hunter. They say he was a mad lord, an architect obsessed with death games. He designed the castle to confuse, imprison, and kill. Corridors that led to nowhere, doors that closed on their own, and rooms where the exit simply disappeared. Travelers seeking shelter there were never seen again. The village around it was gradually abandoned, as peasants reported hearing screams echoing from the high towers, even decades after the Lord's disappearance. But the legend gained strength when, years later, a group of explorers decided to defy the curse. Liam, a photographer of haunted places, found the castle on an old map. With his team, Claire, his assistant, Peter, a skeptical historian, and Aaron, a paranormal equipment technician, he set out to explore the Towers of the Soul Hunter. They arrived at the castle at dusk, as the sun hid behind the hills. The air around it was heavy, and an oppressive silence took over the valley. The group entered through the immense iron door, which creaked like a lament. The entrance hall was vast, with rotten tapestries covering the walls, and a huge chandelier fallen on the floor. But the strangeness came soon. When they looked back, the door they had entered through was no longer there. Peter laughed, convinced it was a trick of the architecture. But as they walked through the corridors, they realized that something was wrong. Each room led to another completely different. The ground floor did not match what they saw from the outside. And worse still, their steps echoed the wrong way, as if someone was imitating them. They climbed the first tower. At the top there was a circular room with narrow windows and a huge mirror on the opposite wall. Aaron, adjusting his equipment, noticed something wrong with the reflection. Liam was in the center of the room, but in the mirror he was not alone. A tall, hooded shadow hovered behind him. Claire screamed, and everyone turned to look. No one was there. But the temperature dropped suddenly. Aaron's equipment went haywire, picking up signs of movement where there was nothing. The mirror then trembled as if something inside it wanted to get out. Then came the sound. A dry crackle, like heavy footsteps climbing the tower, but no one else was in the castle, or at least no one alive. Liam pointed his camera at the staircase and took a picture. When he looked at the image, terror froze his blood. The staircase was full of bodies. Pale figures, with empty eyes and mouths ajar in expressions of horror, slowly climbed in their direction. But in the real world, the staircase still looked empty. Only the sound of footsteps approached. The group fled in despair, trying to find the exit. But each door they opened led back to the same place. The walls seemed to move. The corridor that once led them to the entrance now ended in a dead end. Then Liam realized they were being hunted. The lights of the lanterns flickered and went out. In the darkness, a whisper echoed, "Another one for the collection!" Claire screamed. Something pulled her back, and her scream was cut off abruptly. Liam and the others tried to reach her, but only found the void. Aaron cried, repeating that they needed to get out of there, but get out to where? The last thing Liam remembered before losing consciousness was seeing the hooded shadow coming out of the mirror. The next morning, only Liam's camera was found outside the castle, its photos intact. But none of the explorers were ever seen again. Some say that if you visit the castle and climb the tower, you can hear whispers calling for you. Others claim that when looking in the tower's mirror, you will see something behind you, something that is still hunting. The Castle of the Watching Statues. Eldermere Castle sits atop a forgotten hill, shrouded in perpetual fog. Its Gothic towers, eroded by time, watch the landscape like silent sentinels. But what truly haunts those who approach are not the decaying walls, but the statues that surround the fortress. Hundreds of them. Men, women, children, faces frozen in expressions of absolute horror. Their sculpted eyes seem to follow anyone who passes, and those who dare to touch them feel an inexplicable chill run down their spines. The castle's history is shrouded in mystery. In the 15th century, it belonged to a sculptor named Lord Gregor Duval, an eccentric and reclusive man. Little was known about him except for a disturbing obsession. He never hired servants. No visitor ever saw a single employee in the castle, and yet the property was impeccable. The lights in the windows turned on at night, the gardens were well kept, and new faces appeared among the statues month after month. The truth only came to light when a traveller, lost in the forest, found refuge in the castle. He was never seen again. However, days later, a new statue appeared in the gardens. The face was his. The villagers, horrified, formed a group to invade the castle. When they broke down the gates, they found the corridors filled with sculptures, each more realistic than the last. In the center of the great hall, standing holding a blood-stained chisel, was Lord Gregor, but he was no longer human. His body was stone, his skin cold and hard, but his eyes still seemed alive. The villagers fled, sealing the castle forever, but the statues remained. Centuries later, a group of researchers decided to explore the ruins. Among them was Eleanor, an archaeologist determined to unravel the secrets of the castle. With her were Thomas, a skeptical historian, Lucas, a photographer, and Sarah, an art restorer. They arrived at dusk as the sun sank below the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows among the sculptures. As they walked through the garden, Sarah stopped before a particular statue. It was a woman, with her hands raised, as if trying to protect herself from something. This doesn't look like a common sculpture, she murmured. The details, the texture of the skin, it's impossible. Thomas laughed. Are you saying they're real? Sarah did not answer, but as she examined the statue more closely, she noticed something terrifying. Broken fingernails and stone chips fallen at the feet of the figure, as if someone had tried to get out of there. A freezing wind blew through the garden. At the top of the highest tower, a light flickered, but the castle had been abandoned for centuries. Who or what was still in there? The group entered the dark halls. The air smelled of mold and cold stone. With each step, they felt watched, not by the shadows, but by the statues. They were in every room, positioned in a disturbing manner, some standing in the corridors, others sitting as if they had been caught in the middle of a meal, all frozen in time. It was Lucas who noticed it first. When taking a picture of the main hall, he captured something impossible. In the image, the statues had changed position. "This is not possible," he whispered, trembling. Then they heard a sound coming from the upper floor, a slow dragging, as if something of stone was moving. Eleanor took her lantern, illuminating the staircase. At the top, she saw a shadow crawling into the darkness. "Let's get out of here, now!" she ordered. But when they turned around, they realized something even worse. The statues had surrounded the exit. Their faces were different, their expressions had changed. Sarah screamed when she felt something touch her shoulder, but when she turned around, there was nothing. The group ran desperately, trying to find another exit, but the corridors seemed to lengthen, to twist in on themselves. The castle was playing with them. It was then that Thomas tripped. Eleanor turned in time to see him being pulled into the shadows by something that moved, with the sound of stone against stone. His scream was brief. Lucas fell to his knees, gasping. They are still alive," Sarah sobbed. Eleanor grabbed her hand and ran. It didn't matter where, as long as it was outside. The next morning, only Eleanor and Sarah emerged from the castle, but Sarah no longer spoke. Her eyes were wide, her skin cold as marble. On the ground next to them was a stone chip. Inside it, embedded, a piece of human flesh. Today, they say that the statues of Eldamir still watch, and that, if anyone gets too close, they can hear whispers in the breeze. Whispers asking for help.